Started my own business at 16, paid off my debts, and bought a house in cash. Then my family sued me for taking the life my sister deserves. I, 32M, stared at the lawsuit papers on my kitchen counter, the ones that arrived yesterday morning, and wondered if this was some kind of cosmic joke. My parents and older sister were suing me for $2 million. The claims stated that I had unfairly benefited from family resources and taken opportunities that rightfully belonged to my sister. I read it 3 times before the absurdity fully sank in. The family resources they mentioned were the same ones they denied me access to 16 years ago when they kicked me out at 16 for refusing to drop out of high school to work full-time at my father's failing hardware store. My sister needed college money, they'd said. I was being selfish by wanting an education too. The opportunities they referenced were the business I'd built from nothing, sleeping in my car for 8 months, eating 1 meal a day, teaching myself coding and digital marketing from library computers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me explain how I got here. When I turned 16, my parents sat me down for what they called a family meeting. My sister was 18 and had been accepted to an expensive private university. Dad's hardware store was bleeding money, eaten alive by the big box stores that had opened nearby. Mom worked part-time at a salon, but it barely covered groceries. They told me the family needed me to step up, to be a man about it. They wanted me to quit school, get my GED eventually, and work full-time to help pay for my sister's education and keep the family afloat. I said no. It wasn't defiance exactly, more like self-preservation. I was good at school, really good, especially at math and anything computer-related. I had plans, scholarships I was working toward, a future I could see clearly. My sister had average grades and no real direction beyond wanting the college experience her friends were getting. I asked why she couldn't go to community college first, why I had to sacrifice everything when there were other options. My father's face went red. He told me I was selfish, that family meant sacrifice, that my sister deserved her chance and I was standing in her way. Mom cried and said she never thought she'd raised such a heartless son. My sister just sat there, looking uncomfortable but not speaking up. Not defending me, not suggesting alternatives, just accepting that my future was worth less than hers. They gave me a week to think about it. I spent that week making plans instead. I had $2,000 saved from working summers and weekends at various jobs. I packed what I could fit in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, took my important documents from Dad's file cabinet when they were out, and left 3 days before the week was up. I left a note saying I loved them but couldn't do what they asked. I hoped they'd understand eventually. They didn't call to understand. Dad called to tell me I was no longer welcome in their home, and he hoped I learned a hard lesson about putting myself first. Mom texted that I'd broken her heart and my sister's future. My sister sent one message asking if I was really going to be this selfish. Then nothing. Complete silence. I finished high school while sleeping in my car, parked in different locations each night to avoid trouble. I showered at a gym where I had a basic membership, studied at libraries and coffee shops that didn't mind me sitting for hours, and worked every job I could find that worked around school hours. I washed dishes, delivered pizzas, did night shifts at a warehouse, cleaned offices. I graduated with a 3.9 GPA and a scholarship that would cover most of a state university education. But I didn't go to college right away. I'd gotten interested in website design and digital marketing through self-taught learning during those library hours. I noticed local small businesses had terrible online presence or none at all. I started offering cheap website design and basic digital marketing services. My first client was a family restaurant that paid me $300 for a simple website. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I reinvested everything. Every dollar went back into learning more skills, better equipment, building a portfolio. I moved from my car to a room in a house with 5 other guys, barely furnished, but it had a roof and internet. I worked 18-hour days building websites, managing social media accounts, learning search engine optimization, teaching myself everything I could about digital advertising. I was 19 when I landed my first major client, a regional chain of auto repair shops that paid me $15,000 for a complete digital overhaul. That was the turning point. I hired my first employee, another self-taught guy I'd met online. Then another. By 22, I had a small agency with 8 employees. By 25, we'd expanded to 30 employees and were handling marketing for mid-sized companies across 3 states. I paid off every debt I had, including the credit cards I'd maxed out in the early desperate days. I paid cash for a modest 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood when I was 28. During all of this, my family maintained radio silence. I tried reaching out a few times in the early years, sending emails that went unanswered, leaving voicemails that were never returned. Eventually, I stopped trying. It hurt, but I built a life anyway. I had friends, employees who became like family, a business I was proud of. I dated, had relationships, lived a full life. The wound from my family's rejection scarred over, still there, but no longer bleeding. Then 8 months ago, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. It was my sister. She sounded nervous and started with small talk, asking how I was, saying it had been so long. I stayed cautious, waiting for the real reason she'd called. It came eventually. She needed help. Her marriage was falling apart. She was going through a divorce, and she'd heard through extended family that I'd done well for myself. She wondered if I might be willing to help her out financially, just temporarily, maybe $10,000 to help with legal fees and getting back on her feet. I asked about mom and dad. She said they were fine. Dad had finally closed the hardware store years ago. They were managing on retirement savings and mom's salon income. She said they missed me. I asked if that's why no one had contacted me in 14 years. She got quiet and said things had been complicated, that they'd been proud and stubborn, that maybe everyone had made mistakes. I told her I'd think about it, and we should meet for coffee. We met at a place halfway between our cities. She looked older, tired, nothing like the confident college girl I remembered. She talked about her marriage, her ex-husband's affairs, the expensive divorce. She talked about her job as an office manager that barely paid enough. She mentioned she'd never finished college, dropped out after 2 years when she got pregnant and married. The expensive private university education my future had been sacrificed for lasted less than 2 years. I didn't say that part out loud. Instead, I asked what happened to mom and dad helping her. She said they'd helped as much as they could, but they didn't have much. The hardware store had gone under. They'd lost a lot of their savings trying to keep it alive. I asked if they knew she was contacting me. She admitted they did, that they'd suggested it actually, said I was doing well and family should help family. The irony sat heavy between us. I told her I'd need time to think about it. She pushed a little, said she really needed help soon. The legal bills were piling up. I stayed firm and said I'd be in touch. We parted awkwardly. I didn't help her. I know that sounds cold, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. This wasn't about the money exactly. I could afford $10,000 without blinking. But these people had thrown me away at 16, told me I was selfish for wanting a future, cut me off completely for 14 years, and now suddenly family mattered because they needed something from me. The anger I thought I'd processed came flooding back. 2 months after that coffee meeting, Dad called. His voice was the same, gruff and direct. He said we needed to talk about family business. He said I'd done well for myself, and it was time to step up and help my sister, help my parents who were getting older and could use support. He suggested I could pay off my sister's legal bills, maybe help them with their mortgage, perhaps even bring my sister into my business to give her stable employment and income. I asked where this energy was when I was 16 and sleeping in my car. He said that was different. I'd made my choice back then. I asked how many times he'd checked if I was alive during those years. He said I'd been the one who left, who cut them off, who chose pride over family. The gaslighting was stunning. I told him I needed to go and hung up. Mom started texting, long messages about family, forgiveness, how she prayed I'd grown into a man who understood what mattered, how my sister was struggling and I had so much, surely I could share, how they'd always loved me even when I made things difficult. I blocked her number after the 5th essay-length guilt trip. That's when my sister showed up at my office. She'd somehow gotten past reception, claimed to be an old friend. She was crying when she came into my office, saying she was desperate. The divorce was getting nasty. Her ex was trying to take custody of their kids. She needed money for a better lawyer. She begged, actually begged, on the verge of being on her knees in my office. I told her to leave. She called me heartless, just like Dad had predicted. She said I'd become exactly what they'd feared, someone who forgot where he came from, who abandoned family. I reminded her they'd abandoned me first, that I'd slept in my car at 16 because of them. She said that was my choice, my pride, my stubbornness. She said if I'd just helped back then like they asked, we'd all still be a family. The mental gymnastics were impressive. Security escorted her out when she wouldn't leave voluntarily. She screamed in the lobby that I was stealing her life, that I'd taken everything that should have been hers, that I owed her. Several employees witnessed it. It was humiliating and enraging and heartbreaking all at once. I thought that was the end of it. Then the lawsuit arrived. $2 million for what they claimed was unjust enrichment, misappropriation of family resources, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The complaint stated that I'd been given opportunities and support that were meant for my sister, that I'd manipulated family assets for personal gain, that my success had directly caused my sister's financial hardship, and that I'd deliberately isolated myself from family to avoid my obligations. The family resources they referenced were apparently the occasional dinners they'd fed me before I turned 16, the roof over my head as a minor, the basic parenting they'd done. The opportunities were my father's business contacts, though I'd never used a single one, and he'd had no contacts in my industry anyway. The manipulation was my taking of personal documents when I left, documents that were legally mine. The direct causation of my sister's hardship was somehow the fact that I hadn't funded her life for the past 14 years. My lawyer laughed when she read it. She called it one of the most frivolous lawsuits she'd seen in 20 years of practice. She said we'd get it dismissed easily, possibly even get sanctions against their lawyer for filing something so baseless. But it would take time and energy, and it would be public. My family was really trying to destroy me now. I spent a few days being angry, then something shifted. I got strategic. My lawyer filed a motion to dismiss and a counterclaim. But I also hired a private investigator. If they wanted to make this public and ugly, I'd make sure the full story came out. The investigator found interesting things. My sister had actually received over $100,000 from my parents over the years, including the tuition they'd paid before she dropped out, money for her wedding, down payment help for a house she'd later sold, constant bailouts from various financial troubles. My parents had refinanced their house twice to support her. Meanwhile, I'd received nothing after age 16, as expected, and had never asked for anything. He also found that my sister's divorce wasn't quite the victim story she'd portrayed. Her ex was filing for full custody because she'd been having an affair with a coworker, had emptied their joint accounts, and had a history of unstable behavior. The expensive lawyer she needed wasn't to defend against false accusations, but to fight against the consequences of her own actions. Dad's hardware store hadn't just failed due to competition. He'd made terrible business decisions, refused to adapt, drove away loyal customers with his attitude, and had been investigated for labor violations. The business failed because of his choices, not market forces alone. My lawyer compiled everything into our response. Character witnesses from the early days, people who'd known me when I was homeless, employers who'd given me chances, library staff who remembered the polite teenager who practically lived there. Documentation of every dollar I'd earned and spent, proving I'd built everything from nothing. Evidence that I'd reached out multiple times over the years only to be ignored or rejected. The investigators' findings about the real family financial history. When my family's lawyer saw our counterclaim and evidence, he apparently advised them to drop the suit immediately. My lawyer told me he'd called her, said his clients had misrepresented the situation, and they wanted to withdraw everything with prejudice. I said no. We were going forward. If they withdrew, I wanted a public apology and admission that their claims were false. Otherwise, we'd see them in court. They refused the terms. Said they'd rather go to court than humiliate themselves publicly. I suspected pride was the only thing they had left, the same pride that made them throw away their son 16 years ago. We went to court. It was a preliminary hearing, just arguments on the motion to dismiss, but both sides had to appear. I saw them for the first time in over a decade in that courtroom. Dad looked old, shrunken somehow. Mom's hair had gone gray. My sister looked desperate and defeated. They wouldn't make eye contact with me. The judge was clearly annoyed at having to hear the case at all. She asked their lawyer to explain the legal basis for the claims. He struggled, tried to make arguments about family obligation and moral duty. The judge cut him off and said this was a court of law, not family therapy. She asked what specific resources I'd supposedly misappropriated. He mentioned the home I'd lived in as a minor. She asked if they were seriously claiming that providing legally required support to a minor child created a debt. The courtroom was silent. She asked about the opportunities I'd allegedly stolen. He talked about business connections and family reputation. My lawyer pointed out I'd worked in a completely different industry that didn't exist when I left home, using skills I taught myself, building a client base with no connection to my father's failed hardware business. The judge looked at my father and asked if he had experience in digital marketing or web design. He said no, but insisted he could have introduced me to people. She asked who, and he couldn't name anyone. Then she addressed the claim that my success caused my sister's hardship. She asked their lawyer to explain the causal mechanism by which my web design business prevented my sister from finishing college or maintaining her marriage. He said it was about family resources being diverted. My lawyer submitted the evidence of the $100,000 plus that my parents had given my sister while giving me nothing. The judge asked if my parents had given me a single dollar after I turned 16. Their lawyer admitted they hadn't. The judge denied their motion in its entirety. She said it was without merit, bordered on harassment, and she was awarding attorney's fees to me. She told my family they should be ashamed of themselves and suggested they seek family counseling instead of litigation. She dismissed the case, and our counterclaim proceeded automatically. My counterclaim was for defamation, malicious prosecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. My lawyer said we had a strong case for all three. The lawsuit itself was evidence of malicious prosecution. Their statements to extended family and their public scenes qualified as defamation. The pattern of behavior met the threshold for emotional distress. Their lawyer contacted mine the next day. They wanted to settle. I said I'd consider it for a written apology published in the same places they'd trashed my reputation, an admission that all their claims were false, and $100,000. They balked at the money. I reminded them they'd sued me for $2 million. My lawyer said we'd probably get more if we went to trial given the evidence and the judge's obvious disgust. They settled 3 weeks later. The written apology went out to extended family members, posted on social media where my sister had made accusations, sent to business associates they'd contacted trying to damage my reputation. It stated clearly that I'd built my business entirely through my own efforts, received no support from them after age 16, and that their lawsuit was baseless and wrong. They paid the $100,000, which I donated to a charity supporting homeless youth. But here's the thing that still keeps me up some nights. After the settlement, Mom sent me one more text before I blocked her again. She said I'd won, I'd proven they were wrong, and she hoped I was happy now. She said they'd only wanted what was best for the family, and I'd always put myself first. Even in defeat, even after losing in court, even after being forced to publicly admit they'd lied, she still couldn't see it. Couldn't see that they'd thrown away their son to fund their daughter's failed dreams. Couldn't see that asking a 16-year-old to sacrifice his future wasn't reasonable. Couldn't see that cutting off all contact for 14 years meant they didn't get to suddenly demand support when it suited them. I'm not happy I won. I'm tired. I'm relieved it's over, but there's no joy in it. These were supposed to be the people who loved me unconditionally, who supported me, who wanted the best for me. Instead, they were people who saw me as a resource to be used, who threw me away when I wouldn't comply, and who tried to legally steal from me when they realized I'd succeeded without them. My business is doing better than ever. I recently expanded to a 4th state. I've got amazing employees, some of whom know parts of this story and supported me through it. I'm dating someone who thinks my family is insane and can't understand how they could treat their kid that way. I have a good life, a life I built from nothing through sheer determination and a lot of sleepless nights. But sometimes I still think about what it would have been like to have a family that celebrated my success instead of resenting it. To have parents who were proud instead of entitled. To have a sister who was happy for me instead of jealous. I think about alternate timelines where I went to college normally, where my family supported both their kids, where success didn't have to come with the price of losing everyone who was supposed to matter most. People ask if I'd ever reconcile with them. I don't see how. They're not sorry for what they did. They're sorry they lost and faced consequences. They still think they were right to ask a child to sacrifice everything. They still think my success somehow belongs to them, that I owe them for the crime of being born into their family. The lawsuit papers are still on my counter. I keep them as a reminder, not of the victory exactly, but of the price of that victory, of what it cost to build this life, of who I lost along the way, even though maybe they were never really mine to lose. Sometimes success isn't about winning. Sometimes it's just about surviving long enough to prove you deserved a chance in the first place. I'm still figuring out if that's enough.